friends. Welcome to Foggy Oak Fairy Tales, a stories podcast for all ages, where we tell farm stories from real life happenings on Foggy Oak Farm, as well as fantasy tales to spark both learning and imagination. I'm so glad you're here. This week, I'm sharing stories from spring lambing at my childhood home, Mossy Dell Farm. Lambs are silly, playful, and adventurous, and it was always my favorite time of year. Those of you who have been with us for a while may remember that I grew up on a sheep farm. As a result, the month of April in particular always makes me think about lambs. For us, our earliest babies usually arrived around April 15th. One year we jokingly called the first ram lamb Uncle Sam, in honor of the U.S. tax filing deadline date on which he was born. Some farms have more than one lambing season during the year, but we only ever had the one, in the spring, as the grass was growing lush on the pastures and the weather was turning more consistently pleasant. One of the things my dad was particularly focused on with our sheep flock was the cultivation of good, loving mothers. This meant keeping the ewes in our flock who made it through giving birth with comparative ease and immediately took good care of their baby or babies. We'd supplement the fresh grass with corn and special feed to give the expectant mothers lots of energy for the work that was to come. Shortly after lambs were born, we'd go out to work them, which for my dad typically meant weighing them with a portable scale that had a sling attached to it. He'd lift the startled babies into it, holding them above the ground in the sling to get their weight. He'd tag their ears with a unique identifier so we'd know which mom and dad they came from. Twins were pretty typical, though we had plenty of singles as well. Triplets were very rare, and frankly, not something we particularly wanted because 3 babies was often too much for a mom to handle. Of course, for every rule, there is an exception. We had one truly exceptional mother that we called Old Mama, who consistently loved and raised any baby she had. One year she had triplets, and unlike the other ewes who typically lay calmly next to their lambs when Dad came to work them, she went on the attack, trying to butt him with her head and knock him away from her babies. She had many feats besides that. She knew when it was raining to take her babies into the shelter of a round hay bale in the pasture instead of letting them get wet, which many of the other mothers did not think of, and her daughters were consistently wonderful mothers as well, which was one of our favorite traits in the flock. Like many animals, lambs start walking and moving around almost immediately after being born. Give them 30 minutes or so of resting and getting cleaned off by their mom, and they are looking to nurse vigorously. They have to nurse 1 or 2 times per hour in the first few weeks of life, so it's really a full-time job for the lambs and for the mom. One thing I didn't know about lambs before we had them on the farm was how playful they are and how quickly that develops. At first, they'll play primarily with their sibling or their mom, jumping around, kicking their feet high in the air, climbing all over their mom. But eventually, as they start feeling safer, they move further away from their mom. And as their moms leave them for longer periods of time to go and graze and have a break, the lambs start getting interested in one another. At first, playing is tentative. They'll dash up to each other, jumping up in the air and then running away. But eventually, this evolves into full-on group play sessions with all of the spring lambs. One of their favorite games to play was racing. A group of lambs, sometimes 30 to 50 in total, would suddenly take off across the pasture, running up and down the hills in a mad dash to the other side, where, once they got there, they would turn right back around and run, frolicking, leaping, and doing silly twists in the air, and just clearly having an incomparably wonderful time. At some point, they would have to run back to their mothers to nurse, and if there's ever confusion about which lamb belongs to which mom, it's quickly sorted out, because lambs recognize their mother both by their calls and by their smell, and the ewes recognize their babies in the same way. Each lamb has a unique smell based on its mother's milk, so when they nurse, the ewe will smell the lamb, learn its scent, and then if she's ever looking for her baby, She can just go and smell the lamb's butts to figure out which one is actually hers in the chaos of these lamb races. That's a very helpful thing for the mom to be able to do. Sometimes this dedication to smell could make things challenging. For example, if we had a particularly good mother who had lost a baby, and we had a baby whose mother had rejected it, which sometimes happens, we would try to graft the baby onto the other mother, which means we try to have the other mother adopt the baby. But often the mother would know immediately that the baby wasn't hers because it didn't smell right and it didn't sound right. Lambs were typically less picky and were happy to nurse and be adopted, but it could be challenging to get the mother to accept the new baby. One other thing I'll say about Old Mama, the incredible mother I mentioned earlier, was that she was one of our only ewes who would take a baby that wasn't hers, and she could be a wonderful mother to it too. She would often raise multiple orphaned babies. Since not every mother was Old Mama, we sometimes ended up with bottle babies. Bottle babies are a lot of work, but they are also very fun. These are babies where something's happened to the mom or the mom has rejected the baby and we weren't able to successfully graft the baby onto a different mother, so it needs to be raised by people. There are different ways to handle bottle babies, but what we typically did was mix up warm bottles of milk replacer formula every few hours and let the babies nurse from the bottle while it was held by us as they drank. This is why it is such a lot of work to raise bottle babies. You have to be home or come home all the time. And while a lot of people work from home now, that wasn't the case so much when we had our farm. So it meant a lot of trips back and forth during the day to the farm, which was kind of far away from town. However, what this process did produce was incredibly tame, sweet, and fun sheep. These babies would play with each other, of course, but they also loved to follow you around. So I would give them a bottle and then take them for a walk around the farm with them happily running and jumping and twisting around me, calling happily as they ran behind me, exploring. Our bottle babies always loved playing King of the Hill on the stacked hay bales in the barn, and they enjoyed being chased and petted, and of course, they loved when it was time for them to eat. As a general rule, and as you might expect from that kind of constant human interaction, our bottle babies always stayed tamer than the rest of our sheep. They may not have been precisely as tame as they were when they were babies and totally dependent on us, but we always had a few that were especially tame, and that's always helpful in sheep because you know those sheep will follow you, just like they did when they were babies. And with sheep, if one sheep moves off, the others are going to follow it. So if you needed to move them to another pasture or into a corral to get their medicine, you could generally rely on one of the bottle babies to lead the way, especially if you were offering the treats that they had grown up enjoying. Once our sheep grew up and weren't little lambs anymore, they typically needed less oversight than other breeds of sheep because we had a specific breed of sheep called Katahdins. Those are also the same kind of sheep that we have on Foggy Oak Farm today. Katahdins are actually a pretty new breed of sheep. They were developed in the 1950s in Maine, and they were named after Mount Katahdin in Maine. Sheep were one of the earliest animals in human history to be domesticated, but there's plenty of room for evolution and innovation, and that was certainly the goal with Katahdins. There's an old farming expression that a sheep is born looking for a place to die, or if a sheep could, it'd die twice. And that's because sheep are definitely prone to health and other issues. It's one of the reasons we like Katahdins so much because they don't have as many, at least in our experience. Katahdins were bred for a few things. One is that they're hair sheep instead of wool sheep, which means they shed their hair. You don't have to shear them. That makes them much easier to take care of because shearing is time intensive, and once you have the wool off of them, then you have to deal with all of the wool cleaning and carding it and getting ready to sell or process. It's a lot of work. Sheep can also get sick if you accidentally nick them when you're shaving them. Flies like to get in and around the wool. It can be very messy. So not having wool saves a lot of time if wool isn't something that you want. Katahdins were also bred to be very hardy, which means they're able to survive in all 4 seasons. They do well getting most of their nutrition from the pastures, and they tend to be very good mothers. They're fairly tame. They have fun colors like brown, black, brown and white. Sometimes they have a reddish cast to their hair. And another important thing, you don't have to dock their tails, which means shorten their tails, because they're not wool sheep, which the tails are typically docked to prevent issues with flies. So when my husband first saw the Katahdins we were getting, he actually thought that they were cows because they're very big. They don't look like your typical wool sheep, and they don't quite look like anything else that you've seen before. Another important thing about having hair instead of wool is they don't produce lanolin, which is a pretty distinctive smelling grease that is secreted by wool sheep. The benefit of not having lanolin is that Katahdins have very mild flavored meat compared to wool sheep. So if you've had lamb in the past, you might have noticed that strong flavor that comes from lanolin. If you didn't like that, you might like meat that comes from Katahdin sheep because it has a milder flavor. Katahdins are used for both milk and meat. And another thing I didn't really understand when we got sheep, lamb, when you're having lamb, it really just means a sheep that's younger than a year old, not a little baby. Meat that comes from sheep that are over a year old is usually called mutton. So the big takeaways from Katahdins are they're good mothers, they're good meat sheep. Some people use them for milk as well. And in our case, because my dad was really focused on producing good mothers who took great care of their babies and produced nice offspring, we also focused on producing excellent sheep that could be sold for breeding purposes for other flocks. One thing that can be a little hard about farming is the reality is you can't keep all of the sheep that you make. You're always going to have too many males, you'll have too many babies, so you need to sell them, whether that's for breeding stock or for meat. That sacrifice that they make in leaving your farm is what allows the rest of the flock to go on. It's a hard but necessary part of having a farm, and it's part of the bargain of domestication because you only need 1 or 2 rams to serve a flock. You can't have an infinite number of sheep. You have to send some sheep away in order to continue the farm. In return, you give the sheep a good life filled with great nutrition, lots of good memories, a nice place to live. Knowing that our sheep had this good life at our farm with plenty of those opportunities helped me better understand and accept that bargain. I always felt confident that our sheep had a happy and peaceful existence while they were with us. And ultimately, that's your responsibility as a farmer. Our current flock at Foggy Oak Farm doesn't have the demands of raising babies or helping to sustain our farm financially. Their job is to mow the grass in the pastures, and that's about it. We're lucky enough to be able to keep them largely because we like having them. So you might wonder, well, okay, so how long are you going to have your current group of sheep for? Large sheep generally live about as long as a large dog, so 10 to 12 years would be a good lifespan for a sheep. But our current flock has multiple sheep, over 15 years old. That's pretty amazing, but like I said, our sheep have an easy life, and that helps make it possible. We haven't had lambs yet, but bringing lambs to the farm is certainly something we would like to do someday. We have had plenty of baby goats, although none that we've birthed at the farm, so we know it's something that we enjoy and would like to do in the future. For now, though, I have my memories of growing up on a sheep farm with all of the lamb races and lamb silliness, and I can share those stories both with my family and with you. Thanks for joining. We'll have another story next month. The end. Remember, you're part of the story too. What did you think of this story? What did you imagine when you were listening? We'd love to hear your part of the story. If you and your grown-up want, you can share your thoughts or a picture you drew with our Foggy Oak podcast family. You might find it easiest to share with us on Facebook at Foggy Oak Farm, but we have lots of options on our website, foggyoakfairytales.com. You can also check out pictures from the farm and learn more about us. Thanks for being part of the story, and I hope you'll join us next week.